The first time Dr. Elias Rowe saw her, she was standing by the window in room 317, wearing a gray cashmere sweater that looked like it had never known a wrinkle, much less the ordinary wear of a hospital visit. Her back was to the door, her posture impossibly straight. The early morning light curved around her like she'd bent it to her will. He almost thought he had the wrong room. This wasn't the frail woman he'd expected to find after the overnight nurse had mentioned, a quiet type, early 40s, vitals good but avoids all conversation. This woman looked like she owned the world, but when she turned, the effect shattered. Her eyes, green with flecks of gold, had the shine of someone who hadn't slept. They flicked over Elia's like she was taking inventory, polite, guarded, not afraid, just sealed. "Good morning," he said gently. "I'm Dr. Rowe. I'm part of your care team this week." She inclined her head, not offering her name. A long pause filled the room. "I'm not staying long," she finally said. Her voice was smooth, carefully measured. "Just a few tests, my assistant insisted." Elias stepped inside, reading the chart in his hand but more interested in what wasn't on it. A minor cardiac arrhythmia had brought her in, but all tests were inconclusive so far. No family listed, no emergency contact, no insurance filed, just a quiet note in admin, patient declined coverage, all costs prepaid. She wasn't just rich, she was the kind of rich that made even the hospital's finance director tread carefully. "We'd still like to monitor you another 24 hours, Elias said. "Arrhythmias can be tricky. Might I ask if you've experienced any chest pain or shortness of breath in the last few days?" "No pain," she said, "no breathlessness." "Any stress lately?" Her eyes flickered just for a second, then she smiled. It didn't reach her eyes. "Nothing unusual." It was a lie, he didn't know what kind yet, but her voice shifted, softened at the edges. He made a note and continued with the exam. She tolerated it in silence, not cold, not warm, just absent. When he left, he lingered just outside her door, staring at the chart again. Her name was Vivienne Claremont. He'd seen it before in architectural journals, in the bylines of philanthropic articles. Claremont Foundation. That building downtown, the one with the library made of curved glass and filtered sunlight, bore her name. She was a silent millionaire, known for restoring things, homes, art, neighborhoods. But when he looked at her in that hospital room, Elias had the unsettling sense that no one had thought to restore her. That night, Elias stayed late. He lingered by the nurse's station longer than usual, watching her room on the monitors. Vivienne didn't sleep, she paced. She turned the lamp on and off. At one point, she took something from her purse, a photograph maybe. She held it to her chest for a long time. He didn't know why she moved something in him. Maybe it was the way she wore her loneliness like armor. Maybe it was the knowledge that someone could build cathedrals out of grief and call them homes. The next morning, she was sitting up in bed with her legs tucked neatly under the covers, reading a paperback novel with a faded spine. "You're back," she said without looking up. "You're still here," Elias replied with a smile. She folded the book closed and placed it beside her. "I thought about leaving last night, but the nurses would have chased me. They're more persistent than security guards, I'll give you that." He took a seat beside her bed. She didn't seem surprised. "I read about you," he said. "Vivienne Claremont, you don't exactly blend into the crowd. Most people pretend not to notice, you didn't." "I'm not most people." For a moment, silence stretched between them. Then she said, "Why are you here, Dr. Rowe?" "Because you have a heart condition we haven't identified yet, and because I think there's more going on than what your chart shows." She gave him a long, quiet look. "I pay very well for privacy." "I'm not interested in your money." That surprised her, not because she thought everyone was, but because he said it without resentment or righteousness. Just the truth. She looked away then toward the window. "Some things can't be bought, Dr. Rowe. That's the cruel irony. The older I get, the more I realize how little all of this matters." "What matters then?" "I'm still trying to figure that out." He didn't press. The next day he brought her jasmine tea from the cafeteria because she mentioned once in passing that coffee gave her a headache. The day after that, he asked about the book she'd been reading, and when she finished it, he brought her another, an old copy of A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, soft at the edges, pages underlined in pencil. She didn't thank him in words, but she read it cover to cover. They never spoke about her money, or his. He was a doctor from a working-class family, youngest of three, the only one to finish college. His parents still sent care packages even though he lived 20 minutes away. She was the daughter of a tycoon who died on his yacht in Italy and left behind a trail of infidelities and half-brothers. She never spoke of him, but once in the late hours of her third night she said, "I was born into a kingdom I didn't ask to rule." By the fifth day, she was medically cleared. Elias stood at the foot of her bed with the discharge papers in hand. "You're free to go." Vivienne looked at him like she wanted to say something but didn't. She got out of bed, pulled her coat around her shoulders, and paused by the door. "Will you forget me?" she asked. "No." She gave a small nod, then she left. But she came back. 3 weeks later, a nurse paged Elias during his rounds. "There's someone asking for you, waiting in the garden outside." It was late March, the air still sharp with winter's teeth, but Vivienne sat on a bench beneath the dogwood tree, a scarf wrapped around her throat. Her expression was unreadable. "I didn't know where else to go," she said. "Something's wrong again, not with my heart." She touched her chest, "Not that part." He sat beside her, "Then where?" She didn't answer, not right away. Instead, she said, "Do you believe a person can break without bleeding?" "Yes." "I think I've been broken for a long time, but no one ever noticed because I kept the cracks hidden under silk in charity." Elias reached for her hand. "I noticed." She let him hold it. And that was where the healing began, not with tests or scans, but with one broken woman finally letting someone see the ruins beneath her cathedral. The days that followed were uncertain, quiet, and strangely gentle. Vivienne didn't return to the hospital as a patient. She didn't even come for more tests. She came for the garden. Every few mornings, Elias would find her there, always on the same bench beneath the flowering dogwood, sometimes reading, sometimes just staring at the water in the small koi pond like it held a secret she was trying to recall. He never asked why. He only sat with her when he had time between rounds, letting their conversations bloom without pressure. Some days they didn't speak much. Other days she told him pieces of herself, not all at once, but in fragments, as if unearthing something long buried. "My mother died when I was 13, she said once, her gaze fixed on the koi. "It wasn't sudden, cancer, long, slow. I used to sit outside her door at night just to listen to her breathing. I was terrified she'd stop." Elias had nodded but said nothing. She wasn't telling him for a reaction, she just needed to remember aloud. "The nurses at the hospice were the only ones who touched her gently," she continued. "Everyone else was too afraid or too sad. I think that's when I started noticing the people who stayed quiet but did the real work, the people who stayed." There was reverence in her voice, and grief, worn smooth by time but no less sharp at the edges. "And your father?" Elias asked. She shook her head. "He remarried 3 months later, to a woman my age. It was as obscene as it sounds." Elias reached for a branch overhead, idly plucking a dogwood bloom. "You ever let anyone get close to you again?" "Not really. I had relationships. Men who wanted the lifestyle, the foundation, but not me, not the parts I don't put in magazines." "And the parts you hide, what are they like?" Vivienne hesitated. "Lonely," she whispered. "They're very lonely." In that moment, Elias realized something that settled deep in his chest. She didn't come to the hospital garden to feel better. She came because he was there, and because somehow she didn't feel as lonely when they sat side by side in silence. The next time they met, he brought her a flask of hot tea, this time chamomile, and a wool blanket because the early spring air still bit at exposed skin. She accepted both with a quiet smile. "I'm not used to people caring without agenda," she said softly, wrapping the blanket around her shoulders. "Maybe you've been around the wrong kind of people." She tilted her head, studying him. "And what kind are you?" "The kind who listens." "And do you always listen this well?" "I try, especially when it matters." That evening she lingered long after the sun dipped behind the trees, and Elias offered to walk her to her car. It was a sleek, dark coupe parked near the side lot. A driver sat quietly in the front seat, reading the newspaper. "I could give you my number," Elias offered as she turned to leave, "if you ever need to talk." Vivienne looked at him for a long moment. "You already know how to find me." She was right, he did. Days passed, then weeks. Spring softened into May. The city brightened, but Vivienne didn't return. Elias told himself it was nothing. Maybe she was healing. Maybe their small collisions had been enough. But late one night his phone buzzed. Unknown number, a short text. "It's back, the feeling. I don't know how to quiet it this time." He knew who it was. She let him in this time, not just into her thoughts, but into her life. Vivienne invited him to her house, not a mansion as he expected, but a wide, quiet home on the edge of an old estate surrounded by pine trees and low stone walls. It was elegant but lived in, rooms filled with books, paintings, half-finished puzzles. A record player in the corner still spinning soft jazz from some evening past. I bought this place because it felt forgotten, she explained as he stepped inside. Like me. Elias wandered through the sitting room, pausing at a small photograph tucked among the books. It was a younger Vivienne, maybe 20, arms around a boy with a camera and a crooked grin. Your brother, he asked. She nodded. Ethan, my half-brother technically, but we were close until he died. He set the photo back gently. I'm sorry. He overdosed 2 years ago. Heroin. I didn't even know he was using again. The confession came without warning. She hadn't planned it. It simply spilled, raw and shaking. I spent so long trying to fix him, she whispered. Put him through rehab, paid off his debts. He'd disappear, then call me at 3 in the morning from some motel, and every time I went, I always went. And then he was gone. Yes, and I didn't even get to say goodbye. They sat in her library, surrounded by the ghosts of stories and the scent of cedar and old ink. Elias didn't try to fill the silence. He let her grief sit between them like a companion they both recognized. After a while, Vivienne looked at him. Do you ever feel like you're just waiting for someone to see the part of you you've hidden too well? All the time, Elias said, but then again, I'm still learning how to let them. Vivienne leaned back, exhaling a breath that sounded like it had been trapped for years. She looked tired, but there was something else, too, something gentler in the way she held herself. I'm tired of hiding, she said, but I don't know how to be any other way. You don't have to be, Elias said. You can just be. That night he didn't leave, not out of obligation, not out of some false sense of rescue. He stayed because she asked him to, quietly, simply, just a whisper at the door. Will you stay? And so he did. He slept on the couch beneath a woven quilt she'd tucked over him with her own hands. He listened to the sounds of her moving through the house, soft, hesitant, and something in him ached at the thought of how long she'd been doing it all alone. In the morning, she made him coffee, which she didn't drink herself. And when he offered to cook something, she laughed and said it was her turn to care for someone else for once. They spent the day in the sunroom, sorting through boxes of Ethan's old journals. At first she was quiet, unsure, but then she began to read aloud. He was funny, she said, smiling through tears. I forgot how funny he was. They laughed, they cried, and in the spaces between memory and mourning, something unspoken began to take root. Not romance, not yet, something deeper. A trust born from grief and held together by the quiet miracle of being seen. Vivienne didn't need saving, she needed company in the dark. Elias offered her that. And slowly she started to let in the light. Summer came gently, the kind that softened the corners of the city, warm and slow, like it didn't want to startle anyone awake too fast. Vivienne's house, shaded by pine and dogwood, filled with light in new ways, windows left open, curtains lifting in the breeze, the quiet hum of life returning, not all at once but steadily. Elias no longer needed an invitation. He showed up with fresh strawberries, books he thought she'd like, a hand-me-down chessboard he swore he'd teach her how to use. Vivienne, once precise and solitary, began folding small signs of him into her space. A second mug kept near the kettle, a pair of slippers she'd bought in his size, though she'd never mention it aloud. He never asked her to define what they were. There was no need. They were becoming something, not lovers, not yet, but more than friends. They moved through each other's lives like people recovering from the same storm. One late July afternoon, they drove upstate together. No plan, just the winding road and a shared appetite for air that didn't smell like pavement. Elias brought a map that he never used. Vivienne wore sunglasses and a linen dress, her hair tied up in a loose knot that came undone with every gust of wind. They stopped in a town no bigger than a postcard, walked into a second-hand bookstore and spent an hour in the poetry section. Elias read Rilke aloud with the kind of sincerity most people wouldn't dare risk. Vivienne didn't laugh at him. She listened like the words were being etched into her skin. At a little outdoor cafe, she reached across the table and ran her thumb over the edge of his sleeve. You're different from anyone I've known, she said quietly. So are you. She hesitated, then added, sometimes I worry you see me as a project, something to fix. I don't, he said instantly. Vivienne, I don't want to fix you, I just want to know you. She looked down, fingers curling around the ceramic cup. I've spent most of my life being admired, envied, used, very rarely known. He leaned closer, then let me be rare. She didn't answer with words, but when they returned to the car, she reached for his hand without thinking, laced her fingers with his like she'd done it 1,000 times before. They didn't speak much on the drive home. There was no need. The silence between them had become something sacred. That night, Vivienne offered him her guest room instead of the couch. He accepted, grateful not just for the bed but for the small, quiet shift in her trust. There was no rush, no urgency. She was learning to be close again, and he was patient. He'd seen what haste did to the broken. August brought unexpected rain and a phone call that changed everything. Elias was on call when he received it, Vivienne's name flashing across the screen in the middle of a thunderstorm. "Elias," she said, her voice thin, "I need you to come, please, I can't breathe right." She was in her car, parked, somewhere on the edge of a narrow road overlooking the river. He found her 20 minutes later, hands shaking, breath shallow, a small paper bag clutched in her lap like it was the only thing keeping her anchored. "I didn't want to panic," she said as he opened the passenger door, "but I was scared." Elias climbed in beside her, took the bag gently from her hands, and placed one palm against her back. "Just breathe with me," he said, "slow and deep, I'm right here." It took time, but she followed his voice. The panic ebbed slowly, like a tide that refused to obey anything but patience. Her hands unclenched, her breath steadied, her eyes filled with tears she couldn't seem to stop. "I haven't had an episode like that in years," she whispered. "I thought I was past it." "There's no past with grief, it changes shape, that's all." She turned toward him, eyes rimmed red. "Do you think I'm weak?" "Not for a second." She leaned into him then, finally letting herself rest her weight against another person, her head on his shoulder, her silence no longer defensive, just tired, honest. He stayed with her until the storm passed. They drove back to her house in silence, windshield wipers tapping out a slow rhythm. That night he didn't sleep in the guest room. She didn't ask for anything, didn't need to. She just opened the door to her bedroom and left it open. A quiet offering. He stepped inside, and for the first time in years, she let herself be held. Not possessed, not claimed, just held. And when she woke in the middle of the night, sweat on her brow, dreams tangled with memory, he was still there, arm around her, heartbeat steady and human beneath her cheek. By September, the air began to shift. Gold filtered through the trees. The first leaves began to fall. Vivienne's world, once hollow and soundless, began to fill with the rhythm of ordinary joy. They cooked together badly, she burned toast, he mistook salt for sugar, but they laughed, truly laughed, the kind of laughter that lived in the chest. They danced once in the living room, barefoot and offbeat, to a crackling record she hadn't touched since her brother died. Vivienne began hosting small gatherings, just a friend from the gallery, a neighbor from down the hill. Elias saw how she softened with each new guest, not performing, not retreating, just present. "You're not disappearing anymore," he told her one evening as they watched the sun slip behind the trees. She looked at him, quiet pride in her eyes. "No, I'm not." But healing, as Elias knew too well, isn't a straight line. It was late October when she received the letter from Ethan's former rehab facility. A delayed insurance claim. Nothing major, but it came with a reminder, a transcript of his last therapy session, accidentally enclosed. It was a printed page, no more than a few paragraphs, but it undid her. She didn't sleep that night. Elias found her at dawn in the sunroom, barefoot, staring at the paper in her hand. He said he wanted to be better for me, and I still couldn't save him. Elias took the page, set it aside, and knelt in front of her. "You loved him," he said. "You gave him more chances than anyone else ever would have. That's not failure, that's devotion." Her face crumpled. "Then why does it feel like I lost?" "Because it still hurts, because he mattered." She pressed her forehead to his, tears slipping freely now. And for the first time since her brother's death, she let someone share her mourning. That morning, they sat together until the light changed. And when she finally slept, curled in his arms on the sunroom couch, Elias stayed. He watched the slow rise and fall of her chest and thought about how fragile it all was, healing, loving, living again. But he also thought about how beautiful it was, the slow, steady way she was coming back to herself, how she let him walk beside her, not ahead, not behind, beside. Vivienne Clermont had been hidden behind walls for years. But now, brick by brick, she was letting the light in. And Elias quietly was falling in love with every part of her, the broken, the rebuilding, and the brave. By November, something in Vivienne had changed. It was subtle, but Elias noticed. The way she greeted the morning, no longer with dread or distraction, but with a small ritual of intention, the soft whir of her espresso machine, a gentle hum beneath her breath, the slow way she drew open her curtains to let the light in. She still had hard days, but they no longer defined her. One evening, she brought Elias to a fundraiser gala hosted by the Claremont Foundation. It was the first one she had attended since Ethan's death. For years, her board had begged her to reappear, to let the cameras catch her in something expensive and aloof, to remind the public that the heart of the foundation hadn't stopped beating, but she'd always refused. That night she wore a deep navy dress, simple and understated. Her hair was swept back, her shoulders bare. She looked like herself, not a version of her, not the armor, just Vivienne. "Are you sure?" Elias had asked, slipping into his suit jacket beside her. "I'm ready," she'd said, "but stay close." So he did. The room was full of polished voices and careful smiles. Art lined the walls, pieces funded by grants she had quietly approved, works by young creators who had never met her but owed her their start. She shook hands, she smiled, but it wasn't the hollow kind. Her presence was steady, warm, alive. When she stepped up to the microphone to speak, Elias saw her pause, just for a beat. "Some of you know me by name," she began, "but many of you don't know the heart behind this foundation. It isn't legacy or wealth, it's loss. It's the need to create something meaningful after something precious is gone." The room stilled. "This year we're expanding our mental health outreach," she continued. "We'll be funding community therapy programs for those who can't afford care. We'll name it after my brother, Ethan Claremont." She didn't falter. Afterward, Elias found her by the window, fingers curled around a glass of sparkling water. She looked tired but radiant. "I wasn't sure I could do it," she said. "I was." He touched her hand gently. "You were brave." She turned to face him. "So were you, coming here tonight. You're not exactly a tuxedo man." "I'd wear 10 of them if it meant standing next to you." She laughed, truly laughed, the sound soft and clean. Then her expression shifted, quieted. "Will you come home with me?" she asked. "Yes," he said without hesitation. That night was the first time they made love. It wasn't rushed, it wasn't flawless, it was real. Her body, once held like a fortress, opened slowly beneath his hands. She trembled not from fear, but from the weight of letting herself be wanted, not for her name or the shape of her life, but for her breath and skin and the ache she carried. He touched her with reverence, kissed her with care, and when she whispered his name into the crook of his shoulder, something inside him gave way. They moved together like people finding the same rhythm after walking alone for years. In the quiet that followed, she rested her head on his chest and let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something she didn't need to control. In the weeks that followed, their lives folded into each other naturally. Elias kept his place in the city but spent more nights at her home than his own. He left spare clothes in her closet. She bought a second toothbrush for her sink. They didn't label it, they didn't need to. But with closeness came deeper truths. Vivienne began showing him things no one else had seen: her mother's letters, Ethan's drawings, a half-finished manuscript she had started after the funeral but never returned to. "This was supposed to be a memoir," she said one evening, the pages spread between them, "but I wasn't ready to tell the truth then." Elias thumbed through a few of the pages. "Are you ready now?" "I think so if I have you." "You do." One night after a long shift at the hospital, Elias came home to find her asleep on the couch, manuscript pages scattered across the coffee table. Her hand rested over one of them, as if afraid the words might escape. He stood there for a long time, just watching her breathe. And he realized something he hadn't said aloud. He was in love with her, entirely, achingly, quietly in love. Not with the woman on the foundation posters, not with the restored elegance of her world, but with her, Vivienne, who still flinched sometimes when the world got too loud. Vivienne, who found comfort in things like old jazz records and mismatched tea mugs. Vivienne, who had handed him her hurt like a fragile heirloom and trusted him not to drop it. The next morning she found him in the kitchen making eggs, his hair still damp from a shower, wearing a shirt she'd once told him made him look dangerously decent. She wrapped her arms around him from behind. "Do you ever think about what this is?" she asked into his back. "All the time." And he turned to face her, brushing a piece of hair from her cheek. "And I think it's everything I didn't know I was waiting for." Her eyes softened. "You make me want things I thought I'd closed the door on. Maybe it's time to open it." She hesitated. "I'm scared." "I know, me too, but I'm here." She kissed him then slowly, sweetly, like a promise being made for the first time. But life, as it often does, cracked open a storm just when the sky felt safe. It started with a simple call from Elias' hospital. A patient he'd treated weeks earlier, a young man 25 in remission from leukemia, had relapsed. Fast, aggressive, no one had seen it coming. Elias threw himself into the case, staying late, reading every study he could get his hands on. He wasn't family, but he sat with the boy's mother during her night vigils, held the kid's hand when the pain meds wore thin. Vivienne watched it happen quietly, the way he carried everyone's hurt, the way he forgot to eat, to sleep, to breathe for himself. She knew that weight, she'd worn it before. She also knew how it could crush you. One evening when he finally came home, shoulders slumped, eyes dim, she stood in the doorway waiting. "You can't pour from an empty cup," she said gently. He sat on the edge of the bed, face in his hands. "I don't know how to stop caring." "I'm not asking you to, I'm just asking you to care for you too." He looked up. "How did you survive it, losing Ethan?" "I didn't, not all of me, but the part that lived." She learned to ask for help. She knelt before him, took his hands in hers. "You don't have to be the strong one every minute," she said. "Let someone else carry it for a while." He pressed his forehead to hers, voice breaking. "I don't know how." "You're already doing it," she whispered. "You came home." That night it was her turn to hold him, her turn to be the stillness he'd once been for her. And in that quiet exchange of care, a new kind of love emerged, not built on rescue but on reciprocity, not on need but on choice. As winter approached, the house took on a new kind of warmth. They decorated a small tree, not because either of them believed in grand traditions, but because it felt like something a home should do. They lit candles, shared dinners, spoke openly not just about their pasts but about their futures. One night, Elias found her sitting in the study, typing. "You're writing again," he said. She turned. "I am." "What's it about?" She smiled. "It's about a woman who forgot how to feel, and the doctor who reminded her that healing wasn't just about surviving." He leaned against the doorframe, watching her. "I think I know how it ends," he said. "Do you?" "Yes, but I want to hear you say it." She stood, walked over to him, and slid her arms around his waist. "She lets herself be loved," Vivienne whispered, "and then slowly she learns how to love back." Elias rested his forehead against hers. "Then it's already true." Snow arrived in December, sudden and heavy, blanketing the hills around Vivienne's home in a silence so complete it felt sacred. The world slowed. The garden vanished under soft drifts, and for the first time in years she didn't resent the stillness. She welcomed it. Inside the house, something had settled between them, no longer fragile or tentative, but steady. Real. Elias had officially moved in the week after Thanksgiving, though there had been no big discussion. It simply happened. His things mingled with hers, his books beside hers on the shelves, his watch on the nightstand next to her earrings. Two lives quietly braided. They spent long mornings wrapped in blankets, reading to each other from their favorite pages. Evenings were slower, full of soft music, candles flickering low. Vivienne had found comfort in repetition, not for its familiarity but for the gentleness of it, a life built on presence, not performance. And yet there remained a part of her, the quietest part, that still feared it was too good to last. She didn't voice it, but Elias saw it, sensed it, the way someone who loves deeply always does. It showed in how she double-checked the locks before bed, how she stared out the window a moment too long when he left for night shifts, how she held him sometimes as though she wasn't entirely sure he'd stay. One evening, just before Christmas, he found her standing in the doorway of Ethan's old room. She'd turned it into a studio months ago, a place for light and paper and memory. But that night she wasn't working. She held a box, an old one, worn at the corners. Inside were photos, letters, a crumpled drawing Ethan had once made of her as a superhero. "He called me vivid," she said I had color in me even when I couldn't see it. Elias sat beside her on the floor. She passed him a letter. It was short. Ethan's handwriting was erratic, full of heartache and apology. "He wanted so badly to be better," she said. "And I think I've carried the guilt for both of us, for surviving him, for not doing more, or maybe doing too much." He didn't respond right away, just held her hand, thumb tracing slow circles across her skin. "You did everything love asks of us," he said, "and sometimes love still loses. That isn't failure, it's just the cost of caring." She looked at him, her eyes rimmed with the shine of tears not yet fallen. "Do you think he'd be proud of me now?" "I don't think," Elias said gently. "I know." She exhaled, shaky but lighter. That Christmas they didn't throw a party, they didn't travel, they stayed home, lit a fire, opened gifts in pajamas. Vivienne gave him a wristwatch with the inscription, "For every moment you stayed, thank you." Elias gave her a ring, simple, silver, no diamond, a promise, not a proposal. "For now," he said, "but when you're ready." Vivienne smiled, tears slipping down her cheeks. I've been waiting for someone to ask me when I'd be ready, not if. January rolled in soft and gray. The days quieted again, but the quiet no longer felt lonely. Vivienne began writing in earnest. Not just the memoir, but essays, letters to no one, stories she hadn't let herself imagine before. She submitted something to a small journal under a pseudonym and never told Elias until it was published. I just wanted to know if the words could stand on their own, she explained, passing him the printed page. They don't just stand, he said, they move. She laughed, flushed, folded herself into his side. And when his father fell ill in February, Vivienne flew with him to Ohio without hesitation. She held Elias' hand during the long hours in the waiting room, made casseroles with his mother, folded laundry like she'd always belonged there. She never once made it about her. Later, Elias told her, "You're the strongest person I know." She only shrugged, "No, I'm just learning how to stay soft." Spring returned again. The dogwoods bloomed early that year, and the hospital garden came alive with color. One morning, Elias brought Vivienne back to that same bench, beneath the tree where they'd first begun to unravel each other. "You know," he said, "it started here." She smiled, brushing a petal from his shoulder. "I remember. I think about the first time I saw you, how you stood by that window like you were miles away." "I was," she said softly, "but you found me." "I didn't find you," he said. "You let yourself be seen." She turned toward him then, green eyes lit with something steady and bright. "You asked me once what matters," she said. "Back when I was still hiding behind everything, I never answered you." Elias nodded, remembering. "It's this," she said, "letting someone see all the parts of me, not the polished ones, not the powerful ones, just me. And, and learning that I'm still loved." He reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "You always were." The breeze moved gently through the trees. Somewhere nearby, someone was playing a cello, slow, aching notes rising like smoke into the sky. They sat there hand in hand for a long time. No promises made, no declarations needed. Just the quiet understanding between two people who had once been strangers with wounds, and who had together learned how to build a home in the spaces between the pain. Not a perfect love, but a true one. And that at last was enough.